Hello, and welcome to Mindful Living Week. Today we'll be exploring how to cultivate the foundations of a healthy and balanced mind. I'm glad to be joined here with Dr. Rick Hanson, who is one of the leading teachers of practical neuroscience and well-being, as well as an exceptionally wonderful human being. So, Dr. Rick Hanson, thank you so much for joining us.
Kaylee, thank you for having me.
So today we'll be exploring the neuroscience of meditation and mindfulness, as well as how we can cultivate greater relaxation and focus, and getting into some of the nitty-gritty details of how to bring mindfulness into our everyday lives. So to start off, what exactly is mindfulness, and what kind of impact can it have on our lives?
It's a great question to start right there. People can use that word mindfulness in different ways. That's okay, as long as we know what the local dialect is, how we're using the word. I use it in a way I think that is very consistent with its original sense in the 2,500-year-old early teachings of the Buddha, the sense of sustained present moment awareness, which is easy to do for half a breath, but for a whole breath, or 4 breaths in a row, or 10 breaths in a row, not so easy to do. That sustained present moment awareness can be applied outwardly as well as inwardly. It can be widened open to accepting and seeing everything, or that present moment awareness can be brought together to a laser-like point of concentration. Alongside present moment awareness can be and usually are other factors, such as acceptance, or self-compassion, or investigation, or interest, or making efforts inside the mind to be more skillful with what we're mindful of. A kind of inadvertent error has crept into many modern Western understandings of mindfulness that reduce it to, or make it only, radical, inert, passive witnessing of the internal stream of consciousness. And that's a wonderful way to relate to the mind and to develop as a capacity, but it's not the only way to be mindful. We can be mindful while we are arguing with our partner, or recovering from a loss, or guiding ourselves to be less addictive when it comes to the third cookie there. Just because we are mindful doesn't mean that we cannot also engage wise efforts of various kinds inside our mind.
And is that mindfulness something that we have naturally, or is it something that we need to learn?
I think people are naturally mindful for a few seconds in a row. That's quite natural. It's also true that there's temperamental variation. Some people are calmer in their nature, others are more distractible and stimulation seeking, and that's just natural for the tribe, the human tribe, if you will, to have temperamental diversity, which is really the fundamental diversity that's not socially constructed. That said, people in general can develop greater steadiness of mind, greater capacity to sustain that present moment awareness and apply it to a growing granularity of mindfulness, I call it, in which we're tuning into subtler transitions of thoughts and sensation or feeling inside ourselves, as well as picking up more and more events per second, actually. So definitely we're able to train in that way to balance our natural temperament, to compensate for the ADD culture in which we live, attention deficit disorder kind of culture in which we're continually bombarded with stimulation. We really need to train ourselves to overcome the impact of that culture, including the ways that it affects the brain over time. And also for people who've been traumatized or who've had really threatening life experiences, it's natural to be extra jumpy or vigilant or skittery in attention if that's been a person's life. So there as well, it's really helpful to train in mindfulness. There's a lot of research these days on different training programs, as you well know, and their impact. The good news is that, like any psychological resource, kind of an inner muscle, mindfulness is an inner muscle, much as confidence or gratitude or secure attachment to others is an inner resource, a kind of muscle that you can develop. And that means that we can develop mindfulness like any other mental resource with some deliberate effort over time. And then we have tremendous influence over the front end of who we are becoming. Because if you think about it, much as you are what you eat, well, in a fundamental sense, you are what you pay attention to, including the ways in which what we pay attention to is the first step in what scientists call experience-dependent neuroplasticity, the first step of changing the brain. So what we pay attention to, where our mind dwells, is who we are becoming. If we don't have very good control over that front end of who we are becoming, I think of it as a spotlight and vacuum cleaner. It illuminates what it rests upon and then sucks it into us. If we don't have very good regulation over where our attention is resting through mindfulness, then we don't have the ability to really regulate who we are becoming. And we are therefore also very vulnerable to others for various reasons, not always with our best interests in mind, who are trying to take our attention and move it toward one shiny object or another. So at the essence of it all, for me, mindfulness is the foundation of autonomy and self-reliance and any capacity to help yourself learn and grow and heal along the way in this life.
What are what would be a good example of placing your attention on something and then that being what you become?
Sure. Well, there's a traditional saying, you may have heard it, that the mind takes its shape from what it repeatedly rests upon. Well, the modern update linked to or summarized really in the increasingly well-known saying, neurons that fire together, wire together. So the neurons that you keep firing together are going to tend to wire together and form habits inside or inclinations of character for better or worse. And so one example is that people who routinely are not mindful and are caught up in just a wandering mind and a mind typically ruminating on negative things like resentments or self-criticism or anxious worries about things they can't influence. If people's minds dwell increasingly, let's say in resentment or stress or self-criticism, that's who they become. They move from state to trait. They move from states of resentment to acquiring trait resentment. Or they move from states of self-criticism to acquiring trait self-criticalness. Flip the other way, again, as much research shows, if people repeatedly rest their attention on authentic experiences, let's say of gratitude, or of grit, or experiences of self-worth, or self-compassion, if the mind repeatedly dwells there, those neurons that are firing together are going to start wiring together. And people will, as much research shows, develop the trait of gratitude or grit or compassion or confidence. And that makes all the difference in the world. Where does your mind dwell and what is in your heart? And to appreciate that where your mind dwells is what gradually fills your heart over time. And what fills your heart over time tends to condition and shape where your mind dwells in a circular kind of way. And that circle, unfortunately, often takes the form of a vicious cycle as people dwell and fill their hearts with self-criticism, sorrow, anger, grudges, grievances, and so forth. Alternately, a person can work that cycle by helping their mind dwell in what's beneficial, authentic, and useful, use that to fill their heart, and on the basis then increasingly of what fills their heart, incline their mind in an increasingly beneficial and useful direction.
Mm-hmm. What are some ways that we could cultivate mindfulness to be able to have this choice of where we place our attention?
What you said right there about choice is absolutely correct. People playing a video game do not have a wandering mind. It's easy to pay attention with stimulation that's coming at you, rat-tat-tat-tat-tat. To be able, though, to exercise choice when you're not so caught by an object of attention is fundamental to mindfulness, and emphasizing that word choice, to a kind of existential autonomy and self-directedness in this life that I think is especially important as forces moving against people these days especially feel so powerful and out of our control. So some of the ways to develop mindfulness and literally to train the brain in different circuits and substrates that are involved in the regulation of attention and what's called metacognitive awareness, in which you're aware of being aware. You're paying attention to whether you're paying attention. The neural substrates of that actually become developed in measurable ways through MRI studies as people do this training. I think of a few things that I think are really useful. Commit to doing something contemplative a minute or more a day, in which You rest your attention on something wholesome, whatever that might be, and you get to decide what that is, and then for a minute or more, stay with it. Give yourself over to it. Commit to that minute or more each day. That has been a personal commitment, and it's made an enormous difference for me. For many people, I should add, the way that they do a formal mindfulness practice or contemplative practice is, in the broadest sense, a form of prayer. In other words, it's interesting. While secular mindfulness has really come into the West and it's been extremely useful for many people, most people around the world who are being deliberately mindful are doing so in a religious framework. It doesn't mean that we have to do it in a religious framework, but for me it's a matter of respect and appreciation of diversity to call that out as well. So for some people, their object of attention when they're doing that minute or more is something that is a relationship with something divine or transcendental, call it God. For many other people, though, they're being mindful by watching a candle or repeating a word in their mind or just tracking the sensations in their body, let's say, of breathing. So that minute or more a day, a formal practice, highly recommended. Second thing a person can do is look for prompts repeatedly in kind of routine ways over the day to come back home to who you are, what you are in this moment, what's happening right now, as you, let's say, eat a meal. That gives most people roughly 3 opportunities at least a day, unless you're snacking all the time, and then you just have more opportunities for mindfulness, right, as you go through your day. Sometimes it's said, try to be mindful every time you walk through a door. Just notice the number of times you walk through a door and you come back. So having lots of little moments over the course of a day, I think are really helpful. And then the last thing I would just add is to recover more rapidly from mindlessness. The root of the word for mindfulness in the language of early Buddhism is memory. In other words, when we are mindful, we are recollected rather than forgetful. So it's normal to have the mind wander a bit from time to time. There's something kind of adaptive actually and useful about it, because when your mind wanders, it's open to new inputs. On the other hand, for a lot of people, their mind's wandering all over the place, and they come home only a few minutes a day. And so getting better, in my third suggestion here, at catching yourself when you've wandered off and you've just lost focus on whatever it might be, including just resting in the present as it is with no agenda. Getting better at catching yourself and coming back faster is a third major way to train in mindfulness over time.
Mm-hmm. I think earlier you mentioned the word positive neuroplasticity. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that, and also what some of the most recent studies are saying about this mindfulness training and meditation, what it can do.
Oh, wow, that I could go on, so I'll try to stop me if I blather on. So very briefly, neuroplasticity. Plasticity just means a physical system can be changed. Neuroplasticity means that the nervous system, especially its headquarters, the brain, is being changed by the information moving through it. The function of the nervous system is to process information, to receive it, to store it, to transform it, and to communicate it. And a large fraction of the information flowing through the nervous system is the basis for our experiences, our phenomenology, our consciousness. So that's the larger context. We're changed by our experiences, as I suspect we'll get to later, especially our negative ones. We'll talk more about that. Positive neuroplasticity is simply the notion that we can help the nervous system be changed for the better, and we can actually increase its sensitivity to being changed for the better through training it over time. And in the process of that, we develop and acquire for ourselves various beneficial, useful, typically emotionally positive, though not always, qualities of mind and heart, such as grit and gratitude, compassion and confidence, secure attachment, know-how, social intelligence, emotional intelligence, somatic intelligence, and so forth. So that's the essence of positive neuroplasticity. It's a general term. It's a term I use myself a lot, but I didn't coin it. Positive neuroplasticity. Now, as evidence for, among many kinds of evidence in research on human and non-human animals, evidence for the benefits of mindfulness training in positive neuroplasticity are really quite striking. So I'll just list a number of the major findings, and people can look more into this very developing area of research. So I'm going to focus here on the acquisition of trait mindfulness and durable structural or functional changes in the brain based on mindfulness practice over time. And I just want to make that distinct from momentary changes in the brain and in the nervous system when people are practicing mindfulness in the moment. They're very important. Those beneficial states are very important. But to me, what's really important is the lasting value, right? What actually sticks to our ribs, in effect, change that lasts. All right. So one of the major changes is that people who routinely practice mindfulness compared to, let's say, matched controls have measurably thicker cortex, the outer layer of the brain where most of the action is for information processing and neural function. People who routinely meditate or do other forms of formal mindfulness practice have measurably thicker cortex in a part of the brain called the insula. There are two of them. These are on the inside of the temporal lobes. And this part of the brain is important because it's involved with tuning into ourselves, especially our gut feelings or the internal sensations of the body. And we draw upon that capacity to tune into the emotions of other people. So as people become more mindful of their own internal states, they become more empathic for the states of being of other people. Pretty good. And so we now have a measurably thicker insula, which kind of makes sense. Neurons that fire together wire together. People repeatedly being mindful, they're working that muscle of interoception, tuning into themselves. And so the part of the brain that's engaged with that becomes measurably thicker as a result. A second major region that becomes measurably thicker in the cortex of longtime meditators are prefrontal regions behind the forehead that are involved in the executive regulation of attention and action and emotion, which makes sense as well. That's a different muscle. Call it the triceps. They're working the triceps to deliberately keep regulating their attention by meditating, let's say, or being deliberately mindful in some way. And as a result of deliberately regulating their attention, they work that part of the brain, neurons that fire together wire together, and it becomes thicker as a result. Another major change is that people who repeatedly practice mindfulness have increased activation in the left prefrontal cortex, which is important because the left prefrontal cortex for right-handed people and roughly half of all left-handed people, in other words, a large fraction of people, it's just switched for many left-handed people. The left prefrontal cortex for most people is involved with positive emotion and with what's called an approach orientation or an opportunity orientation or promotion orientation rather than an avoidance orientation. It's important to be able to avoid harms and so forth, but the general attitude of looking for opportunity and not being defeated by threats is really useful for functioning as well as for mental health. So it's a good thing to develop greater activation in the left prefrontal cortex. Another major finding related to mindfulness training is kind of a calming of the alarm bell of the brain, the amygdala, so that it doesn't get so agitated so easily. And also, as a regular finding, increased gray matter, and as well as white matter. In other words, evidence of neural structural change in a nearby part of the brain called the hippocampus, which there are two of them technically, although people speak of them in the singular, so there are two hippocampuses or hippocampi. And this part of the brain is important because it puts things in context. It inhibits the alarm bell, the amygdala, and the hippocampus also tells the hypothalamus, quit calling for stress hormones, enough already. So building up structure in the hippocampus is a good thing, and as structure is developed in the brain due to these positive neuroplastic changes, so does function improve. It's a little bit like as your muscle tissue gets bigger, you can lift more weight. You can do more good things for others as well as for yourself. Maybe just finishing on a few other well-established findings now. There is typically increased activity in the brain in what's called the gamma range of brain waves, which has to do with many large numbers of neurons interacting with each other in a synchronized way. And when they do so in terms of gamma range activity, which is 30 to 80 times a second, just think about that. When that kind of activity is more common in a brain, learning tends to increase, as does a sense of wholeness and integration. So that too is a nice real long-term finding from meditative practice. And then I'll finish on a very cool recent finding. It was established in a retreat that involved a lot of concentration. And so we kind of wonder if there would be similar findings in more everyday forms of mindfulness practice. But on this retreat, it was discovered that these parts of our genetic material called telomeres, that are essentially the caps on the end of our DNA material, and they protect DNA from the long-term effects of aging. And as these caps, these telomeres, shrink, that exposes people to age-related illnesses. So preserving telomere length and supporting little factors like an enzyme called telomerase, all these funny syllables to produce in your mouth, that research is showing that protecting and conserving the length of your telomeres is really good. It tends to protect us against age-related illnesses. Well, it seems like meditative practice, at least in a very concentrated way over multiple weeks in a row, helps protect telomeres. If you just think about that, these are strips of atoms wrapping a molecule, and scientists are able to discern that meditative practice does seem to help protect them as well. Just to finish, if the pharmaceutical companies could patent meditation or various forms of meditation training based on the research benefits that have been well established alone, including physical structural changes in the body, not just in the nervous system, also in the immune system, the cardiovascular system, and other systems in the body. If Merck or a large pharmaceutical company could patent meditation, we would be seeing ads for meditation routinely on the evening television, at least in America, alongside ads for Prozac and Viagra and a few other goodies.
Yeah, that's some pretty incredible stuff.
Yeah, that is, actually. Yeah, it is.
So I'm going to change gears here a little bit, and I wanted to ask you about the balance between maybe finding a sense of calm and appreciation in our lives through being in the present moment, as you've been speaking about, and then also creating change in certain areas of our lives. Over this week, we're going to be looking at 7 different areas of our lives and really setting aspirations of what we want to cultivate there. So how do we hold this dynamic between appreciating the present moment and then also creating something different for things that might need to shift?
You've got several things entwined there together, different dichotomies. So let's see here. So just to call it out, one is, to me, you're talking about the balance of acceptance and being dropped into the present moment, radically accepting it, as Tara Brach's book has the title, radically receiving it, while at the same time being adaptive and resourceful and forward-leaning about helping yourself grow into being that which calls your heart. So how do we do both? How do we both be accepting, and also how do we be kind of radically settled into impermanence and transience, while at the same time helping to develop things that last, at least in this life? That's a fundamental distinction, isn't it? And then a related one that I heard in what you said is the balance of calm and activity. And so to kind of put those two together, it's interesting that for many people, they would like more calm in their core. So calm is something we can develop. In other words, people do want to have more inner peace. And that is something we can certainly develop in ourselves. The process of development, which is what we're about to talk about now, has 2 necessary steps to it, or stages in it, and both are critically important. The first stage of development, of whatever we might want to develop, greater calm or greater happiness. Like if I see someone who's depressed in my psychotherapy practice, I'm not happy about their calm. I don't want them so calm. Or if I see a kid who's creating a lot of difficulty for themselves or for other people, I'd like to have more anxiety there about what's going down and the consequences for oneself and for other people. So Calmed isn't necessarily a perfect thing. That said, for many, many people, they would really like to develop it. So how do we develop calm? We develop it like anything else. First, you have to experience it. You have to experience some calm. Or maybe you want to experience some gratitude if you want to develop gratitude, or a sense of love, or forgiveness if you want to develop those as well. First, you have to experience it. In the second necessary step, though, of any kind of lasting learning, that experience in some way must lead to neuroplastic change of structure or function. Otherwise, there's no lasting value by definition. And this fact is routinely overlooked, including by people like myself who know a lot about it consciously. It's so easy to lose track of the second necessary stage of learning. So then we're left with this kind of paradox in what you said. To be able to grow or to help other people heal or develop, including through growing inside themselves wholesome, useful factors of mind or heart, we have to be able to both accept what we're experiencing fully while also encouraging other useful things to come into being. And I think that some people tend to err too much one way or the other. Some people, many meditators, frankly, many people who practice mindfulness, I think have gotten too drawn into a kind of whirlpool or backwater of quiescence. They're very good at just being with what's there again. And it's still here again. I'm still irritable. I'm still worried. I'm still caught up in this issue. I'm still dead in the water in my life. I don't know how to mobilize myself again. Well, that's a problem. Flip the other way. This was more my error. People who are always focused on how to fix themselves and change for the better and acquire some new persona or some new clever way of being. Hack the brain, man. And I think that's problematic as well. We can get way too caught up in a kind of erector set orientation to our own mind. And for me, the balance is given to us in the middle, and it's available by example in, I think, the great teachers who did both. Why not do both? Why not be able to both really receive the moment and be with it utterly, while at the same time looking for opportunity, looking for what can I learn, how can I grow, how can I become a little stronger, how can I be a little more insightful, how can I develop a little more wise view, wise intention, wise speech, wise effort, wise concentration, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Why not along the way? And then, as we look for opportunity and we help our mind dwell on what's useful, and then through dwelling there for a few breaths in a row, take it into ourselves, as we do that, we actually become more able to radically accept the moment and open increasingly out into choiceless awareness in a beautiful circle. And I think over time, people more and more just rest in the present moment, right at the front edge of now, utterly accepting. I think that's where people who are very far along in their practice abide. On the other hand, to be able to abide in that way, in a world that is disturbing, changing, and challenging, really requires, and in almost everyone, the development over time of inner resources, mental factors of various kinds, including mindfulness and steadiness of mind, so we can actually abide with that kind of radical receptivity right at the front edge of now.
Thank you. I think that's such a helpful dynamic to keep in mind as we're going through this event. Yeah. And I think also I've heard a lot of people have the concern of sort of falling into one side or the other, to be this sort of quiet, calm meditator that might not have the motivation to change things that might need to be changed in their life or their work or their relationships. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more to that, of this idea that we might have that if something isn't painful or we're not feeling pushed by something, that we might not have the motivation to change it. Is there another way that we could look at that?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting idea. And so it is true that pain is a motivator. And so let's say you want to help yourself lose weight, eat fewer cookies, let's say. So you could put a picture of someone who's morbidly obese, let's say, on the refrigerator, or you could deliberately take a picture of some unattractive to you at least part of your body, like your spare tire, and then put it on your refrigerator. Maybe that would motivate you. But a lot of research shows that pain is a short-term motivator with a lot of cost. And over the long haul, people typically are much more able to sustain a marathon of a successful career or dreaming big dreams, as Brené Brown puts it, daring greatly. People are much more able to do that over the long haul if they are drawn toward some beneficial result rather than prodded by a sharp stick in their back to move away from some negative thing. And as a psychologist kind of person, I've really thought a lot about how there is how can I put it, that unpleasant, painful experiences are necessary to acquire some psychological resources. In other words, I've been through certain things in wilderness, in the wild, rock climbing, and many other things. And also I've been in certain situations with other people that were really pretty horrible. And there was a toughening in me, a steeling in me that was developed over time through that kind of experience that I don't think I could have gotten from anything else. On the other hand, most pain has no gain. Most pain is just stressful, including emotional pain like irritation or loneliness or loss. It's just stress. And stress, experienced stress, is really toxic, particularly if it's chronic or more than mild. It's toxic to our bodies, it's toxic to our brains, and to our minds and relationships over time. So the question then becomes how to get the gain without the pain. Not out of resisting the pain, because then you just have more pain. If you go negative on negative, you're stuck to the negative, and your mind will gradually take the shape of what it repeatedly rests upon, including the pain, let's say, including such as painful negative emotions that you're trying to fight with or push away. So you can't do that. On the other hand, if we think about the two-stage necessary process of developing any kind of internal resource, mindfulness, self-compassion, happiness, commitment to social justice, you name it, the necessary process of that kind of development involves first experiencing what we want to grow and then internalizing it, turning that state into the beginnings of a trait. And most of those experiences of what we want to grow in ourselves are enjoyable. So for me, the enjoyability of an experience of gratitude or love or beauty or worth is only a small reason for helping the mind to dwell there. It's reason enough. But the main reason, at least for me, is that dwelling there is how to grow that increasingly in oneself. And through growing it in oneself, one then starts to establish more and more a resilient well-being that is able to maintain an unshakable core of peace, contentment, and love inside oneself, even as one deals with challenges in the world. And it's also true that as we dwell there repeatedly and fill ourselves up, wow, we have so much more we can give to other people. So I think pain is overrated. It's overrated as a motivator, and it's overrated as a basis for learning and growth. And if people are mindful of their own growth process, which arguably is one of the most important things to be mindful of, the process of changing for the better, the process of growing or becoming more mindful. If people watch that directly, they'll see that most of the experiences that have lasting value were actually enjoyable at the time. And most of the experiences that were painful and costly and made us more brittle, made us more reactive and prickly, those were painful, unpleasant experiences. The takeaway from that to finish is not that we should fight the pain, but that we should really appreciate the value, including as the front end of the process of healing, transformation, and awakening, of turning to those wholesome, beneficial experiences that really feed us and grow those muscles we need for the long and often challenging road of life.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
If I could build on that too, people raise at this point often, well, what about true nature? Or what about Buddha nature? Or is this not some new form of seeking and grasping and dualistic pursuit of goals and whatnot? There's a whole collection of questions, objections that are understandable and I think very reasonable. So first off, even if our true nature is radiant, wakeful, loving consciousness, if someone has that view, even inside the natural frame, without reference to anything transcendental, just if you think, oh, okay, at bottom, human nature is loving, happy, wakeful, and resourceful. Great. That said, do we experience that true nature naturally and easily many times a day, especially as we're bombarded with all kinds of other stuff? I think most people don't. And so there's a natural process of uncovering of that true nature that is developmental. And so both things can be true. Our true nature, let's say, has always already been wakeful, peaceful, loving, and wise, and yet it's been obscured. So the process, as they say in Tibet, of removing the obscurations is also a developmental process, even if what development reveals is what's always been there all along the way. But still, we had to reveal it. And I think of these practices as, among other benefits, being like clearing the dust and the sludge and the cement and the concrete off of the stained glass windows of the mind so that the light that was always already there can shine through more brightly.
It's beautiful. I'm wondering if we could combine what we were just talking about with this idea of pain maybe not being the most useful motivator. And what we were talking about earlier of the power of being able to place your attention purposefully through mindfulness. And maybe using a practical example of someone that might be interested in moving along in their career. And so they might have been using a lot of ambition and possibly the pain of stress, pressure to move forward towards an important goal.
That's right.
How could
or the pain of feeling inadequate or less than others in terms of social comparison. That's a big issue for a lot of people and certainly a motivator. Okay.
Yeah, that's a powerful one.
Yeah.
So instead of using these things of feeling less than or that you need to become better or just the pure pressure of the stress to accomplish something that might be very difficult to accomplish, what would it look like to do that with a mindfulness approach?
Right. Well, so a couple of things. I want to use the example initially of rock climbing because it immediately comes to my mind. And I think there are certain situations in which it's perfectly appropriate to use pain as a motivator, quote unquote, or to use the threat, the prevention of the threat as a major motivator. I think there's a place. I've definitely had times where I was on a rope, but high above my protection. If I fell, it was not going to be pretty. And internally, I didn't want to fall. So I was focused on the negative. And there's a place for that. And maybe we are protecting another person. And what's really clear in our mind is we don't want our kid to be hassled by a teacher or bullied by some other kid on the playground. I mean, we want this illness to get treated now. I mean, all right, there's a place for that. On the other hand, there are a lot of costs that go with that. By definition, pain is suffering. So immediately we're suffering. And second, we are starting to take on board, or if we're using these methods with others, like trying to motivate our children through criticism or scolding, there is the accumulation in our body or the body of the other person of what scientists call allostatic load, which is a fancy term for the gradual wear and tear of stress, including the stress of anxiety, irritation, hurt, or feelings of inadequacy or loneliness. So we're taking that cost along the way. In terms of being mindful, a person can be mindful of being motivated by pain, and they can be mindful of being motivated by gain. I'll just put it that way, just so it rhymes. They're mindful under either condition. So mindfulness itself is not the distinction, I think. I think the distinction is between where are you dwelling. In other words, what are the primary elements of the experiences you're having, and what are you doing with those experiences? So are you learning from the pain, for example, and are you helping it have some kind of benefit for you, including taking on board a lesson for me as a rock climber, don't climb this route again. Or make sure that you alert your partner to something that is important before you just head up the cliff. All right. On the other hand, if you are experiencing something emotionally pleasurable, like for example, a sense of how good it will feel to acquire some greater credentials or capabilities in your career so that you feel more self-respect and you feel more confident and able to just step into something. Well, if you're aware of that, then you can mindfully help your mind dwell on those as motivators and not fall into the pitfall of chasing them in a grasping way in which you get attached to the results, but a way in which you hold them lightly. You're aware of the benefits that will come to you and others of, let's say, acquiring skills, and that is a way to help motivate yourself to look for ways to do that and to stick with that training program over the long haul and do your homework, even when you'd really rather be doing something else. And so that sense of positive reward can draw you in this direction. And as you experience the fruits of your efforts along the way, taking them in will help motivate a person to keep on the high road and keep going uphill, even when it's difficult. So I find that if people want to help themselves in their work, I've had a lot of background as a business consultant, I think there are a few people who are wildly ambitious and driven and full of possibilities, and even to the point of annoying their friends and family, maybe. But for every one of those, I think there are 19 or 99 people who have lost faith with themselves and are not betting on themselves and are not backing their own play and not taking their dreams seriously and losing opportunities as each page of the calendar comes off, as each day goes by. They're not helping themselves as a friend to move forward in their life. One way or another, maybe it's in the domain of work, career, jobs, and so forth. Maybe it's in the domain of love, looking for partners or getting real about the clock ticking. Maybe it's in the domain of spiritual practice. Maybe it's in the domain of creative expression. I think of these as kind of like four major intertwining domains of human activity. So we can, I think, help ourselves, and it's really important to do so. One of the big mistakes I made in my life was to be too casual about the passing of time in my 20s and 30s. And now in my 60s, I'm much more aware of the fact that there's limited runway, and each day is a precious gift. As the proverb has it, if you take care of the minutes, the years will take care of themselves. And so for me, that's the opportunity, including in the realm of work. Can we be mindful of what's in this minute to help myself a little bit at the end of this minute to be a little more capable, a little more insightful, a little more at peace, minute by minute by minute, which then accumulates day by day by day.
Wonderful. And maybe as a closing question, would you have some suggestions of how someone might start their day to start off on the right foot?
Sure. If you'll allow me, I'll answer it in two parts. And I think the best place to start your day is the night before, as you head into sleep. And it is interesting that the founder of the Jesuits, Ignatius Loyola, I guess hundreds of years ago, said a really interesting thing. He said, if you give up all your practices, all the things you do except one, keep the one thing you do just before falling asleep. And he was an early neuroscientist, in effect, because what we do just before sleep sets us up for the whole night, or whatever our sleep cycle might be, in terms of how the reverberations keep rippling through the mind and the brain, and we're very receptive as we fall asleep. So one suggestion for setting up the day is to try to get to bed at a reasonable time, and then as you fall asleep, deliberately help your mind dwell in whatever calls your heart, whatever's wholesome. Sometimes people will reflect on the accomplishments of the day, or they'll just pick one thing they kind of want to rest in, maybe a funny little moment with somebody, or they were walking the dog and it was neat, or somebody paid them a compliment. Or maybe they just want to rest their attention in a sense of peacefulness and tranquility and, good night moon, right? The evening is settling down. That's, as you know, the title of the children's book. And so that's my first suggestion. And one of the things I do as I fall asleep often is related to something I do frequently when I wake up, which is to try to help myself rest in the sense of fundamental well-being, which requires an ongoing sense of a sufficiency of needs met, enough needs met. And as I've said, our three great needs are to be safe, satisfied, and connected, which is experienced as, in broad terms, a sense of peace, contentment, and love. Related loosely, if people care about it metaphorically, to the inner lizard, mouse, and monkey. Pet the lizard, feed the mouse, hug the monkey. Okay, so just before sleep, often I will call to mind things that help me feel realistically safe and increasingly relaxed and at peace, which includes often a sense of calm strength, so that one can cope with the challenges that are coming at one. Then in terms of contentment, I'll do little things to remember what I'm grateful for or glad about, and get a sense of drivenness, being able to fall away, because there's enough already. One can still be aspirational. One can still dream big dreams and be inspired without a sense of anything being wrong or missing, not enough. And then also in terms of love, I'll do little things to drop into a sense of connectedness. I'll bring to mind people who care about me. I'll bring to mind people I love myself. Maybe I'll have a sense of connectedness to the whole universe. Peace, contentment, love. And in the morning, I'll often do that in a kind of a little more detailed way. I'll sort of establish a sense of capable coping and calm and a kind of ease internally for safety. And then I'll take a moment to kind of reflect on the day and think about my goals for the day and steer clear of getting all attached and pressured and contracted about them. And instead, think about accomplishing those goals in a more relaxed and confident and satisfied already sort of way. Boom, contentment. Bringing to mind my privilege, my gratefulness. There's so many good things already. And then also love, getting a sense of the people in my life I care about. Maybe bringing to mind people who seem like in a different group or politically or otherwise, and having compassion and a sense of relatedness with them. So I'm not carrying around conflict inside my mind, even as I do try to help the world be a better place. And so right there's a kind of centering. Usually takes a few minutes to kind of move through it. Peace, contentment, love. And then established, all right, boom, ready to meet the day.
I'm definitely going to try that tonight.
It's a great practice, partly because it resets these three floors of the house of the brain, as it were, built from the bottom up. And I've known a number of people who really like it. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't mean that you're just gazing at your navel or sitting in your cushion or ignoring the world. It's actually on the basis of this centeredness, resilient well-being, that we then can meet our challenges in a much better way and in a way that doesn't let them invade us. Going back to the early teachings of the Buddha, as he was describing his own run-up to awakening, he used a phrase that I've been thinking about more and more and more. He said, painful feelings arose, pleasant feelings arose, but they did not invade my mind and remain. That's the key distinction. All kinds of stuff will come up for us, including perhaps chronic pain or a heavy heart. It may come up for us, but does it invade the mind and remain? Leaving us with a sense of something missing, something wrong, deficit or disturbance, which is the basis for craving, which is a kind of drive state, broadly defined. Instead of that, we have the opportunity through feeding ourselves emotionally again and again and again, somatically, socially, as we go through the day, we have the opportunity through repeatedly feeding ourselves to replace a sense of something missing, something wrong, with a sense of fullness and balance as the basis with which the next moment arrives. That is great.
Well, thank you so much, Rick. Do you have any closing comments to us before we end today?
Well, if you'll indulge me, I just have two kind of comments to finish with. The first is the sense of what it might be to live mindfully. And I'm making a gesture toward myself because for me there's a kind of image and sensation of being like a sticky net. So as I move through the day, or put a little differently, as the river of time moves through me, I try to be mindful of, and I think this is the opportunity for people in general, of what is difficult or challenging or unpleasant or worrisome, mindful of it as it washes through, letting it go as it washes through. And meanwhile, when there are opportunities to register something beautiful, a sense of connection, let's say with you right now, a sense of inner capability, like I'm not babbling too badly, or whatever it might be, the light glittering on the water, or the taste of chocolate. When we have those opportunities, to let the net be sticky, so those beneficial elements in our experience, in our stream of consciousness, kind of stick to us. And I think that's a beautiful way to move through your day, including out of compassion for yourself and kindness for yourself, to help yourself not be overly burdened by the negative, to use that term loosely, and also helping yourself be fed by and enlivened and lived increasingly by that which is wholesome and positive, quote unquote. So that's the first thing I'll really offer. The second, as we live mindfully, is to get a sense that we practice for the sake of others as well as for the sake of ourselves. And we practice in community with others who are also attempting to live mindfully. People participating in this wonderful program, also people more generally in the world who are really trying to be present and to grow and to heal and develop and help others to do so as well. We're practicing in solidarity with them, in community with them, in camaraderie with them, and we're also practicing for the sake of the greater world. As we live mindfully ourselves, we cause less trouble for other people, and as we live more and more mindfully ourselves, we accumulate gains inside ourselves that then we can offer to other people. And that sense of practice in community, for the sake of others, and alongside others, and maybe even being nourished by others along the way, that sense is very useful, especially in a time in this world when we feel so fragmented and bonds of community seem so frayed and torn and really clearly need mending. This is one beautiful way to stand up against the processes that tear the fabric of society. And it's one way as well to do some mending ourselves.
Thank you so much, Rick. It was a pleasure speaking with you. Yeah. And I'm personally really looking forward to reading your new book, Resilient: How to Grow an Unshakable Core of Calm, Strength, and Happiness. We'll make sure to have a link for it for everyone watching at the bottom of this page. And is there anything you'd like to tell us about that book?
Oh, well, I'll just say very briefly, it really is summarized in the subtitle, How to Grow an Unshakable Core of Calm, Strength, and Happiness. And what it's about really is the foundation of well-being. It's based on my online Foundations of Wellbeing program, which is very experiential. And we summarized it in this book, which also distills life lessons for me, almost 50 years of pretty sustained, focused personal growth to heal myself and then help other people. So it's a very summary book. And I think, frankly, it's especially timely these days when it's so clear that the cavalry is not coming, or if it's coming glacially. And meanwhile, we're kind of on our own, increasingly, with others to develop more of that unshakable core inside ourselves.
Thank you.
Yeah.